The Haunting Tales of Dark Shivering. Diabolique. On the outskirts of Dark Shivering there is a large house that no one lives in. It used to be a family home throughout the 1800s and 1900s, but in the 60s it was owned by a businessman. The man used the house mainly for his taxi business. It had a large parking area at the front, making it ideal for his cars. It was a very successful business, and Sir employed a call handler through the day and night. Most weeknights were pretty quiet, but Friday nights and the weekends were busy non-stop. Jane Matthews had found the job for call handler through one of her husband's friends who was a taxi driver. She would be working mostly the night shifts, as they worked well with her husband's shifts at the Ranks Xerox factory. After being a stay-at-home mum for nearly 10 years, she was looking forward to a new challenge. Her first couple of shifts would be with the call handler she was replacing. She would be shown what to do over the 2 shifts and find her feet before working a busier night on her own. Jane arrived at the old house on the Monday evening just before 6. The man who owned the business, Mr. Hughes, was there to show her around before she started her shift. The house was large and slightly run down looking on the outside and inside. The room she would work in was at the front of the property, and probably used to be either a lounge room or the dining room. It was large, too large for just an office. It still had its original features. The fireplace was in situ, and the large gold and crystal chandelier hung up on a high ceiling in the middle of an ornate ceiling rose. Mr. Hughes had an office opposite this room, and a large fancy staircase ran up the wall on the right. Mr. Hughes took Jane around the building. All the rooms were large but pretty empty. His office had only a desk, chair and filing cabinet. The taxi office had the same, but with 2 sofas at one end of the room. The kitchen had a fridge, kettle, toaster and dining set, but there was nothing homely in there. Just off the kitchen was a bathroom for staff to use. Mr. Hughes took Jane upstairs, but for her job there would be no reason to go up there. There were 4 large bedrooms. 2 of them were full of boxes and stored junk, and the other 2 were mainly empty. Jane felt okay about the property, as she would only be using a few rooms downstairs. Before he left, Mr. Hughes told her that the plumbing in the house was quite noisy, and to expect the odd creak and groan when the heating came on or the water was run. Jane was used to that. Her own house would make knocking noises when the heating pipes warmed up and cooled down. The other call handler was already sat in the taxi office. She was very welcoming towards Jane, but she could see why she was leaving. The lady, called Sue, was heavily pregnant. Jane and Sue sat and chatted away all evening. They happened to know some of the same people, and there wasn't too much to learn about the job. It was quite straightforward. That first night was very quiet. There were only a few calls. 2 for trips to the hospital, 3 for diners at the local Indian restaurant, and 3 for local pubs closing time. Jane had found the first shift okay. She felt confident to work alone once Sue left the business. The second night was much the same as the first. She knew she'd have to bring some magazines and books with her for the quiet nights. Some of the taxi drivers would come in and have a drink and a chat, but it was few and far between. At the end of the second training shift, both women wished each other good luck. Jane took to the job very quickly. By the end of the first month, she felt very at home in the building and confident in what she was doing. She preferred the busy nights of Friday, Saturday and Sunday, but could also appreciate reading her book on a quiet one too. She had gotten used to the pipes in the house making odd noises. When she flushed the toilet, it would whine as it filled back up. If it was a windy night, the letter box would start knocking as though someone was at the door. The house was very drafty and the curtains were always moving. Jane always made sure to dress up warm for work, as the cold draft from the large windows would freeze her hands and feet. One wet windy night in December, the heating was creaking, the letter box was knocking, and the curtains were being sucked in and out of the bay windows. One of the taxi drivers had been in to use the toilet, and so the whining of the water pipe was also adding to the atmosphere of the winter's night. Jane sat at the desk engrossed in her magazine when suddenly she felt a cold chill run right up her spine. It was an odd feeling. The hair on her arms raised and she shivered all over. Sitting up and looking at the window, she felt an intense feeling that she did not want to look behind her into the vastness of the giant room. Quickly, however, before she had time to catch it clearly, in the image of the room behind her, mirrored in the window, she saw something black dart towards the door to the kitchen. She jumped and turned, only to see the door swinging slightly in the breeze. Jane felt unnerved. She always kept the door closed to try and keep some heat in the room. Maybe the draft was enough to open it tonight, she thought, and purposefully went back to reading her magazine. That night was all but forgotten when in January of the following year Jane started to notice a nasty smell in the house. She would be sat working fine for a few hours and then suddenly the smell of excrement would surround her. Jane had dogs of her own and the smell was as though a dog had had an accident somewhere in the house. She searched the building from top to bottom to see if Mr. Hughes' dog Sheba had made a mess anywhere. Yet she could find nothing. The smell would permeate the air. It seemed to be stuck in her nostrils. Sometimes she would get home from work and still think she could smell it. Her husband suggested maybe there was a dead animal decomposing somewhere that she couldn't see. A rat under the floorboards or a cat down in the cellar. Nothing seemed valid to Jane though. It was just a new unwelcome smell that she had to put up with. A couple of weeks after the smell had begun, Jane was in the middle of a very long and boring shift. She had read every word in her magazine and the phone and radio was dead. She went over to the couch and sat on it with her feet up. She contemplated the room. She liked the fireplace and paneling on the walls, but she didn't much care for the wooden floor. It had seen better days. There was a beautiful swirled shag pile carpet in one of the high street shops that would warm this room up a treat. Orange and purple if she remembered correctly. As she was sat with her thoughts, the door to the kitchen clicked open. It wasn't windy that night, but maybe the latch was on its way out, thought Jane. She was still thinking about a nice new carpet for the room when the door creaked open further. Quickly, she forgot about the carpet as she felt that spine-tingling feeling come over her body again. She started to feel a little frightened as she stared at the door. It was slowly opening wider, bit by bit. Although she was starting to feel nervous, Jane wondered if she should go over to the door and close it back up. Or even open it right up if it wouldn't close properly. She weighed up what to do in her head as the door slowly opened. She was just about to get up and go over when heart-stoppingly, a bony grey hand came around the door. Jane could almost not believe what she was seeing. The skeletal hand had long black claws at the end of each finger. Her fight or flight senses had kicked in at this point, and without wanting to see who or what was going to come around the door, Jane ran as fast as she could out of the front door and into the car park. The adrenaline was coursing through her body. She ran straight to the only taxi parked there and banged up against the driver's window. The driver had such a fright, he screamed as Jane opened his door to tell him what had happened. After calming her down, and telling her she had probably imagined it, the driver went into the house and checked it all over. There was no one there. Jane felt foolish. Maybe she had imagined it. But worse was yet to come. One Monday evening Jane had not been feeling very well. Mr. Hughes was grateful that she had still turned up for work, and said she could rest as much as she needed between any incoming bookings. Jane wasn't quite sure what was wrong with her, but she felt unwell as her stomach churned round and round. By midnight she could barely keep her eyes open, and just wanted to lay on the sofa in the fetal position in an attempt to ease her poorly stomach. She lay there drifting in and out of sleep. She wasn't particularly comfortable and she wasn't very warm either. As she woke from a short sleep, she felt sure that she heard loud footsteps coming from the room above, running from one side to the other, but Jane felt so unwell she almost didn't care. Jane was in and out of a dream state the next time she awoke. After being so cold, she felt a warmth on her face that felt good. As the warmth continued and she woke up more and more. However, she began to realize the warmth was wet. Immediately she thought there must be a burst water pipe from the room above dripping down onto her face. But as she opened her eyes, she saw something so horrifying, it sent her to the hospital. There, in front of her was a creature. It had a skeletal form and big black claws. It looked like a slender man on all fours. And just like a male dog cocks his leg to pee, this creature was cocking his leg at Jane's face. The stream of pee was hitting her cheek as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. As the stream came to an end, the creature turned its head to face her. It was of human form, but the face was of a demon. It looked like it was from a horror film. Menacingly, it smiled, showing its sharp teeth to Jane. In that moment, Jane passed out from sheer terror. When she was found the next morning by a driver, she was incoherent. She had to be taken to hospital as she was almost catatonic. As the nurses cared for her on arrival, they noted she was covered in a strong-smelling urine. The incident was put down to the virus she had. The doctors say it had made her delirious, and she had had a delusional episode which had brought on the illusion of a monster. Jane was happy to go along with this theory, although she knew it not to be the case. She never went back to her job at the taxi office again. A few months later, she bumped into Sue with her new baby in town. They chatted about her new baby boy and Sue asked about the job. Jane told her that she wasn't working there anymore and Sue said she wasn't surprised. Jane asked what she meant as she had only left because she was having a baby. But Sue proceeded to tell her that wasn't the reason she left the job at all. She said she had left the job because the house was haunted. Jane's eyes widened. She couldn't believe she hadn't known this. She'd just assumed the pregnancy was why Sue had left. Sue went on to tell her that when she was there alone she would hear footsteps in the room above all night. She said, one night she had gone to use the bathroom through the kitchen. She walked through and back with no issues. Then, she had an overwhelming smell of excrement, so she went back out to the kitchen to see where the smell was coming from. But as she walked through the room, she trod in several piles of poop which hadn't been there minutes before. That was enough for Sue. She didn't want to put up with that kind of mess and so she left. Jane was shocked, and in all the years since has never been by the house again, choosing, always, to take the long way around. If you are a paranut like me, please consider subscribing to my channel. There are plenty more ghostly tales to share, and you don't want to miss them. From imps to demons, vampires to ghosts and dogmen to poltergeists. Dark Shivering has them all.